It is 6:02. The Carson City Airport Authority meeting on Wednesday, November 16th, 6 p.m., 6:02 now, at the Sierra Room in Carson City Community Center. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Chairperson Law?
Here.
Vice Chair Stotts? Member Collins? Here. Member Harvey? Here. Member Shirk? Here. Member Torres? Here. Member White? Here. Quorum is present.
Thank you. Would you all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item C on the agenda, approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None heard. We'll move on to item D. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. Item E. Under item D, it is the intention of the chair tonight not only to hear the audit, which is the item F1, but also to combine that with item J, the treasurer's report, so that our CPA can answer questions and then leave for the evening. So item E, public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matter related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request that the chairman calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Is there any public comment at this time? Yes, sir. Could you come forward, state your name, spell your name, and sign in, please?
My name is David Correo. You can't hear me? Okay. Last name is Corrao, and I've got two quick items. I just was wondering if somebody knew or could bring me up to speed on what the final grading plan is for the east end of the approach end of runway 27. I keep looking as the dirt is removed. We're ending up with the wall of the Grand Canyon. So at one time we had a slope up. Now we've got a wall. So I was just wondering if somebody could enlighten me.
I can do that. I spoke with Cinderlight this week, and they are going to begin in the next probably few weeks to begin sloping towards the end of the runway, opposite the end of the runway. They have begun to remove rock around the sides, and now they're going to be moving dirt to begin the slope. And that should be, well, I don't know when it's going to be completed, but they'll begin moving that dirt probably within the next couple of weeks.
Do you have any idea what kind of a slope that's going to be?
4-to-1 slope.
4-to-1 slope. Okay, and the second item is on Taxiway Bravo, north of Taxiway Charlie. The sagebrush is getting to a height now where we run our aircraft down Taxiway Bravo southbound, that the height of the sagebrush is now right at the underside of the wings. And I was wondering if we could get that cleared up a little bit so that there's more leeway there for the aircraft passage.
Yeah, I'll get that taken care of. We'll get on that pretty soon.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other public comment at this point? We will move on to the other agendized items. Item F1 for possible action, approval of the Carson City Airport Authority audit for fiscal year 2015-16. Ms. Cohn?
For the record, Beth Cohn Cole with Cohn and Company CPAs. We were auditors for the year ended June 30, 2016. I believe you have a bound copy of the audit. For board members, the question is what type of audit opinion was issued, and it was an unmodified, clean audit opinion, which is what you want. In addition, we performed an audit in accordance with government auditing standards, and we had no material weaknesses and no compliance items noted. So that is also good. It was not a single audit this year. You did not receive more than $750,000 in federal funds for 2016, so it was not a single audit. Briefly like to review the results for 2016 compared to your budget, and if you're following along, that's on page 21 of your packet. In 2016, you budgeted total revenue of approximately $621,000, and you received approximately $697,000. So you were $76,000 better than budget, and the areas that you were better than budget primarily was for leases and rock sales. Your expenditures totaled, they go on to page 22. Your total expenditures were budgeted at $573,000 rounded, and your actual results were $517,000, so you were almost $56,000 better than your budget. So your excess of revenue over expenditures for the year ended June 30, 2016 were approximately $180,000. I'm happy to review more of the audit in detail if you would like. It was reviewed with the treasurer in advance, so.
Is there any comment from the members on the audit itself?
I have some questions.
Go right ahead. Member White.
So the treasurer wasn't exactly 100% awake when he read the report, so I do have some questions.
Absolutely. Let's see if I'm awake.
On page 2 of your letter from October 4th, it talks about the authority should document internal controls over federal expenditures, and then there's a portion of a list of 5 procurement methods are provided, written procedure policies are required. So,
Okay, so this is, that's not the bound packet, that's the
Right.
required board communication letter, so I hadn't gone through that yet, but this letter, this is the new uniform guidance.
Right.
That for June 30, 16 was not in effect. So I
Right.
wanted to give you an FYI on these procurement requirements, because I'm concerned for a lot of agencies that have received federal money, that you need to implement this.
so you'll be working with Tim?
Yeah,
to
and
implement
in fact, we talked about it earlier today, and I also just mentioned it to your engineer, because they
Okay.
monitor a lot of your programs. So this is really the future. The uniform guidance is in effect today, and it was in effect last year, but the procurement requirements, which are now stricter, go into effect for the year we're in now,
Okay,
okay?
all right. Page 5 of the audit.
Uh-huh.
About halfway down, year-end position, it says we have the possibility that the fund balance will actually become negative, but as the authority continues to utilize prepaid leases, the cash flow necessary for ongoing operations, does that fall under the definition then of having a deficit budget? Or
Yeah,
is
you
it
can't,
just-
it would be a lack of compliance with our state laws if that happens.
Right.
Something we've talked about in many meetings in the past, that if you budget for projects and spend the money in advance, you are now putting those funds aside in a separate bank account, which
Right.
is new this past year. But you could, if you, that's what, something you have to evaluate every time you do an FAA project. Where will it put you?
But even though the number may end up appearing negative on the sheet, we're still not a deficit budget, is that correct? Because we're working off of a,
So you haven't, this hasn't happened yet. It was always,
Right.
it's just kind of an FYI concern based upon how you, what projects you budget in the future. But right now, you're still positive.
okay,
You're at a positive, if you look up above, well, those are the government-wide, let me give
Right.
you a good number. So you're at a positive 438,000 right now.
okay. Further down the page where you're talking about the risk assessment, where you're talking about the cost for the new master plan at 450,000, seems like we moved that to 470,000 on the last ACIP sheet that I got.
Yeah, I didn't have that, so I apologize if it's
So-
wrong.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so,
470,
Right.
federal share 440.
okay.
And then if we go to page 11, where you're talking about the deposit policies related to custodial credit risk, is that another place we need to create a policy and make sure we understand what's going to happen if one of our banks fail?
Yes, so if you look at page, on page 13, it talks about that you keep all of your funds
Right.
in one bank account, one commercial bank, but that commercial bank is collateralizing funds with the state.
Okay,
So you're protected even though they're in the name of the state.
right, so do...
So you could implement a policy that says that either you have to use separate bank accounts if that risk, if you deem that risk too much.
Right, that's what created the question I have is in your sentence, the authority does not currently have a deposit policy. So is that something we should do, is
Yeah, we
create a
have-
policy?
It would be good to have a policy. It's not a requirement because they are collateralized with the state.
Okay.
But that still puts you at risk because they're in the name of the state and not in the name of the authority. So there's some risk there.
Okay. Moving over to page 12. At the bottom of the page, you're talking about the difference between restricted and committed funds. Now, we've always talked about our three funds that we have, the fuel fund, the jet fuel fund, and the gates as restricted. Should we change those in our budget documents to say committed?
In the accounting terms, they're committed. They're not an outside legal restriction. They're an
Right.
internal commitment, so we can change that.
Okay.
But on your
So-
audit, it does show them as committed.
Okay. Well, actually, a few pages back, it doesn't have, on page 21, it doesn't have any note as what they are. If you look there under
It would-
miscellaneous, it just says fuel flowage fees, jet fuel tax, and gate cards. It doesn't note whether they're committed or restricted.
So it's part of, it's your fund balance that's committed.
Okay.
So it's on page 7, and it shows the gate fees, and it doesn't show the fence fees, but I think that those current year had been expended. But it does commit them, it's just the fund balance, not
Okay.
the income as it comes in.
And then additionally, when you're talking about the gate fees, it says committed resources for gate and fence expenditures. Now, through that whole process of creating that line item, fence expenditures were specifically disallowed. This is for gates only. If it doesn't have
Okay.
something to do with the gate, it's not allowed.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Any further comments on those items, Ms. Coe?
Pardon?
Any further comments on
No.
those items?
No, I will make sure that they're reflected that way in the future.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the audit as submitted? Are there any questions of the other members? Do I have a motion to accept the audit report?
I move we accept the audit report.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Any further comment? All in favor of accepting the audit report as received?
Aye.
Aye. Any, oh, do we have any further public comment on the audit report? Okay. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Now, would you go through the financial statements and the changes that have been made to those since they were posted online
So
previously?
today I went out and posted the audit adjustments. Some of those audit adjustments impacted your numbers, so they've been updated. So for instance, last year in June, you paid the insurance for this fiscal year, so that was in a prepaid expense. It's now in your expense. Tim estimated, based on the budget, your funds that you're going to receive from the city in July of next year. So that a quarterly accrual of an estimate for for property tax revenue is reflected in your financial statements now. And then there were some payables, such as the PERS liability that was in last year's audit that needed to get reversed, so it impacted your current year financials. So there were a bunch of changes that were made after the audit adjustments were done. So do you want me to briefly review these financials for you?
Yes, please,
Okay.
Ms. Cohen.
So you have a balance sheet, October 31st, 2016. You have cash of approximately $737,000. The negative in accounts receivable of $15,000 has to do with your prepaid Cubics lease. So that credit is in there so that Tim can bill it every month. So that's why it's a credit. A little bit of a liability is not much. And then you have the Gonzalez deferred lease at $284,000. So during the audit discussion, we talked about how you're putting funds aside. If you look at your cash, you have $349,000 put aside specifically because that's prepaid lease revenue, and you also have $15,000 of the committed gate money set aside. Then you have your, the next two pages represent your current year versus prior year to date through October, which is 33% of the year through. And as I mentioned, the property taxes are now reflected for one quarter. Every quarter, they'll be reflected at about $48,000. So this, and the other thing that happened with the financial statements that you had previously is in uncategorized was the terminal building. And I work with Tim to move that below the line now as a capital outlay specifically identified so you can see that.
Okay.
Okay? So this reflects for the current year-to-date a loss of $5,056.41. And then below the line, you have your FAA revenue, your restricted, which we'll modify to say committed, your rock sales, and then you have your FAA expenses, and then you have gate maintenance costs, capital outlay, which is about $2,000, and that was for a new printer that you have and a desk that you just purchased. And then the terminal building, you spent $93,000. So the bottom line is that there's a loss of $3,723.37 through October.
Do any of the members have any other questions on the current financial statements as they were produced and brought to the meeting?
No.
Do we have any public comment on the financials that were put out for public use? Mr. Takis, do we need a motion to accept these, or is it just part of the treasurer's report?
Well, this part is part of the treasurer's report. You don't need to accept this. This is a non-action item.
Thank you.
But I do have questions regarding some of the entries in the September financial report, though.
Please proceed.
So, Tim, if you'll take a look at the profit and loss year to comparison, page 2, line 5200. We're substantially lower on fuel sales than we had anticipated. Do you have a sense as to why that might be? I mean, we hear that airplane movements are increasing, but we're selling less fuel?
Well, the decrease in fuel sales is directly related to flight operations, and all may be weather-related. Had a stormy summer, and as we all know, we had a record rainfall last month. For the most part, 2015 was a dry year, and more flight operations were made that year, and we were able to sell a lot more fuel. For example, back in October of last year, we sold 1,800 more gallons of fuel at the self-serve island alone, and October this year, not so much. And we bandied about the reasons why, and it all came down to weather.
Tim, excuse me. Tim, could any of that be related to the north apron being repaired as well?
Well, you know, I thought about that, and I talked to Michael Golden regarding that because I saw these questions come up, and he said that the North Apron did not have an effect on fuel sales.
Go ahead.
Down to line 5404, the rock sales. I see where Cinder Light's taken quite a few contracts. Where are we at? I know several months ago they projected we were probably a couple of years out. Are we still in that same neighborhood?
Yeah, the contract's still for another 2 years. Over the summer season this year, they've had vigorous rock sales, and current rock sales generated $48,778 just for this fiscal year, which puts us 139% above the budget amount. Of course, we're getting to the winter season now. Things are slowing down. That's when Gary Lehman and I had talked about starting to slope that end of that, the digging out, to start sloping that up, and we're going to start on it soon to keep his guys busy. But yeah, the rock sales, he's telling me by the end of the contract period, they should be completed.
I mean, they're not going to be done in 6 months.
No, they got another 2 years on the contract. So.
Was they going to have rocks for 2 years? That's my question.
Please clarify that question.
Well, I mean, are they going to have any rocks in there to sell through the full 2 years?
Oh, yeah, they've got a lot to dig out.
Okay.
They still have, where they're digging now is alongside the area, alongside of Arrowhead Drive, and they still have to start on the south side. So there's
Okay.
still a lot of rock to move.
Line 5150 on tie downs. I know we had budgeted 0 on the tie downs because we had moved the junkyard and we really didn't know where we were going to end up during this construction period. But there's no entries in these following 3 columns. I mean, there should still be what we budgeted and where we're at over budget.
So that is a shortfall of QuickBooks. I have to tell you, there are a few shortfalls, and when there's nothing budgeted, it doesn't come through and it doesn't carry.
Okay.
There's nothing I can do about it. It is a shortfall of QuickBooks.
Okay. Let's see here. Line 6001, engineering. You're showing us at 283.7% over budget. We budgeted 10,000 and apparently we spent 28,368. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, well, that was my error in the categorization of one of the invoices from Atkins for the reconstruction of the North Apron.
Okay.
I did go back through and check that, and the current expenditures to Atkins for general engineering task 1 and 2 was revised and now is at $3,075 and is 30.8% of budget.
Okay. Line 6309, that's our legal expenses. Now, we're not too far off of that, and I want to say thank you to Steve for being mindful, keeping the cost down on that. That 7% over is, like I said, not all that much, but that's directly contributed to the open meeting law complaint that Andrea Engelman filed against us, for which there was no finding. Anyway, that cost us just a little over $4,000. So my point being, that shows how easily we can get out of whack on the legal. So I appreciate Steve and the rest of staff and the authority being mindful of where we're at with that. 63.175, the AWAS service and expenses. We're a little bit high on that since we're only 25% through. Is that cost due to having it moved and certified early, and are we okay? We're good with that?
Yeah, our next inspection and possible moving it back over to the terminal will be at the next fiscal year.
Okay.
So the rest of this year, it's been recertified. We're good until next year, and we should not have any more expenses barring equipment failure.
Okay. My next question really doesn't show up in the reports. It has to do with budget line 6050. That's the obstruction lights. Now, we put $25,000 in that line, but we have pushed that project off or canceled, but it doesn't show up in the report. So should that not show up on the report and just show as having not been spent? Because it's in the budget.
Well, wasn't that last year's budget? It was in
No, that's,
yeah, it wasn't in this year's budget.
we didn't put it in this year's budget?
Last year you had it in the budget.
The budget we approved on May 31, 2016 shows it.
Does it? I don't
Yes, it
remember.
does.
I'll have to double check. I don't have that one with me.
Okay.
Well, that money will not be spent. We've not been successful in convincing the FAA to allow us to do night approaches, so.
Well, I understand that, but if it's in the budget, it should show up on the report as having not been spent.
Well, the problem is if you look on the second page of the budget to actual, although I only have I have October, we don't, oh yeah, we only have the north apron. You only have the north apron on there. Let me double check that.
Okay.
I'll send you an email.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
Do any other members have additional questions? Are there any questions of the public on this item? We do not intend to take action on this item as it's a non-action item, so thank you very much, Ms. Cohen. Thanks. Okay, we will move on to the next item. Item F2 for possible action, approval of the request by John Mays, Lud Correo Family Revocable Living Trust, Seabold Trimotor LLC, and Sierra Mountain Airport North LLC for an extension of their aircraft storage-only leases for 22 years upon raising their rent to the appraised current value and making a financial contribution to the terminal renovation project. Mr. Takis.
Yes, Steve Takis, Airport Council. Let me give a little bit of background, particularly for the new members. When leases are given, airport leases are given, under Nevada law, the process involves getting an appraisal, issuing a request for proposals, essentially, bids, sealed bids, a deadline to receive the sealed bids, and then we open the bids, and there's a process under Nevada law by which multiple bidders can bid against each other. So there's like an auction process. And that is the requirement under NRS 244 for the county to lease property, and that same law applies to us. All of the leases that we're talking about here were entered into under that process. There is another law that says that you can extend or renew leases if there are storage only, aircraft storage only leases based on an appraisal. And that law, which I cited in my briefing memo, is triggered. You have a request for an extension of leases, and candidly, Mr. Lud Correo has been asking me for about the last 10 years, when can we actually address this? And then we go out and get an appraisal. In April of this year, this body, the Airport Authority, approved us going forward with the first step of that, which is to go out and get an appraisal of the property so that we could determine what is a fair appraised rate, fair market value rate. At the time, they required the tenants who were requesting the extension, which was Mr. Correo, Mr. Mays, and a few others that are listed in this item, to pay the cost of that appraisal, which they did. They gave us the money up front. We engaged an appraiser. We engaged William Kimmel, an MAI certified appraiser, who has done work for this airport before and has done work for other airports in addition to a variety of other commercial properties. And we got an appraisal on July 5th of this year in which Mr. Kimmel certified that the value under his appraisal methodology was 12 cents per square foot per year, which is the rate. We originally leased this property out, I think, in the 6 to 7, might have been 8 cents a square foot. And over the years, the CPI increase has driven it up. And currently, the leases that we're talking about in this agenda item are at about 11 cents per square foot. So the appraised value came out not a whole lot more than what they're currently paying. When we looked at this item in April, candidly, I thought the number was going to come in higher, and I thought, oh, great, we'll have a win-win. We'll be able to collect some additional money, pump the rates up a little bit, because seems like we're always taxed with trying to find money, and then they will get a longer term. We'll extend their term out so they get a full 50 years, which is the standard term of the lease that we give out. And we, in turn, will get money back. Well, when it only came in at a penny over, that presented a little bit of a problem. There was pushback from some of the authority members, and even one of the Board of Supervisors contacted me and said, look, you can't give these people a 22-year extension for a penny a square foot. Even though we have a statute that says as long as it's at or above the appraised value, you can extend it. And so what we did is we sat down with these 4 tenants, and they recognized that we currently have a terminal renovation project, which, in your last item, if you looked right on the last page, it's like one of the last items, it's line 6405. We show the $93,000 that's already been spent on the terminal project, which is not in our budget. That was money that was spent. It was approved after the budget was approved at the May 31 meeting, and the question was, well, where are we going to come up with money for that? And one of the board members, who's not with the board anymore, said, well, he actually asked the accountant, how much time do we have to augment that? And she indicated, well, you've got until the end of the fiscal year, so you've got a little bit of time. And so having explained that to the tenants, their response is, okay, how about we do this? How about we come up with a fair opportunity cost for us to extend the leases, and you extend the leases for the 1 penny, move it to the 12 cents, the appraisal value, and we'll also give you a contribution toward that terminal renovation project. And we are unlinking the two. It's a payment toward the terminal, and it's a separate increase in the rent. The payment toward the terminal is not being characterized as additional rent, because if it is, we already know how that works. It gets treated as future payment of rent, and it gets amortized over the next 50 years, and we can't utilize the funds. And the need here is to utilize the funds now to pay for these costs for the terminal renovation. So then the question became, well, how do you establish what that opportunity cost is? And so in my discussions with them, I indicated to the folks, particularly to John Mays, who's actually a very smart guy, that had the appraisal come in around 14 cents, we probably would have just gone, at least I would have certainly recommended to you to just go with the appraisal, raise the rate to 14 cents and go forward. Doing that, of course, doesn't solve our immediate need for cash for the terminal building. And so what we came up with was, how about we calculate what 14 cents would do over the term of the remaining term of the lease, find the net present value of that, do that calculation, and have that be the opportunity cost. And that's how we got to the $86,000 that they are offering to pay as a group toward the terminal renovation project. And so when you sift this all down, what you have is you've got a lease that has 28 years left. They'd like to reset it to 50 years. In other words, we're giving them an additional 22 years on the lease in return for raising the rent from 11 cents to 12 cents per square foot, and also them making this contribution toward the renovation of the terminal project. So in a nutshell, that's the transaction that's being proposed here. I know that I sent out to you, because I only drafted this morning, the actual lease document, which is, of course, one page basically saying we raise the rent to 12 cents, we extend the term, they make this contribution toward the terminal renovation, and that's how we would reset their lease. With regard to all leases, they have to also be approved by the Board of Supervisors. That's what the law that created the Airport Authority requires. So in the event that you approve that extension of the lease tonight, then our next move is I would put it in front of the Board of Supervisors for their approval. And candidly, the one supervisor I talked to who was concerned about it at a penny before, when I explained how the new arrangement we come up with, he was very pleased with it. And I don't know that that means we've guaranteed a vote or anything. That doesn't happen. People don't guarantee votes. But it certainly indicated to me that it was a sanity check to me that other people looking at this think it's a fair deal too. I want to note one other thing before I forget, and then I'll ask if you have any questions. But there were actually 5 leases that were done right at the same time, not 4 of them. The other one is Sierra Mountain Air Park South. And for, I think, coordination reasons and communication reasons, they were not ready to go when the others in this group were ready to go. And so I fully expect that if you approve this tonight, that at the next meeting, you'll have a request from Sierra Air Park South to be doing the same thing, making a contribution toward the terminal renovation in return for a similar extension. One thing that's kind of nice about dealing with this group of leases is they were all done at the same time. And sorry to say that I was here, I think I was chairman of the Airport Authority back then in 1994 when this was done. And these were some of the initial leases we did to begin the process of developing the interior triangle of the airport. We had no utilities running through the airport area. And so there was a member on the Airport Authority who had a very creative, very clever thought, which is he asked, can we put it out for lease, and can somebody bid in putting in the infrastructure and calculate what the value is as their payment for a lease? And in fact, that's what we did, and that's one of the whole reasons that we actually have that entire development of hangars on the interior of the triangle. That deal was made with Ted Contry, and we ended up giving him a 50-year lease. We did an evaluation back then of the value of the infrastructure utilities, all the sewer lines, the water lines, and everything else he put in, the conduits for the electrical, the conduits for telephone, all that other good stuff, and calculated that as a prepaid lease. And so And that is one of the leases that's involved in here. That's the lease that is now owned by John Mays. Because it's a prepaid lease, we have to do something a little bit different with it. His is really fully paid through its entire term. But he has agreed that, okay, treat me the same as the other people who were given leases in 1994, because that's the best surrogate for what the fair rate is, that he's essentially prepaid. And so with respect to his lease, the only difference between his and the others is that he will pay us the additional 1 cent over that term of the lease. And then at the end of the 28 years that's left on the lease, he will immediately jump, his rent will jump up to what the other guys are paying, which is the 12 cents plus the CPI increase each year. And so, in a nutshell, that's my explanation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Mays is here, and Mr. Correo, both Mr. Correos are here, and I'm sure that they could answer questions as well if I can't answer them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Takis. I have been remiss this evening. We have 2 new members that I didn't introduce to begin with, and I apologize for that. We have Aaron Collins at this end from Carson Aviation Adventures, and we have Larry Harvey here from ClickBond, and I appreciate you gentlemen volunteering for this, and I'm sorry you're getting right into the mix of something that's fairly complex, but at this point, does any member have questions of Mr. Takis regarding these matters? Member White.
In regards to the contribution to the terminal fund, is that something the Board of Supervisors would ordinarily have to approve, or is it just being included because it's kind of getting mixed up into the lease language?
It's included because it's part of the deal, and I think the Board of Supervisors typically would approve all of the things that went into the transaction. You know, the 844 says the Board of Supervisors must approve any lease that this board approves. There might have been a way to separate it out into a separate document, but really, it's what it is it's a present payment of the opportunity cost to extend it. And so I thought it was best to be completely upfront, put it right in the document.
Okay.
Any other members? Go ahead.
Quick question. The CPI, it's saying is set forth in the lease. Can you give me more information on, because I don't have that information in front of me?
Sure. Nearly all the leases on the airport, and it wasn't always this way, it took us a while to get there, but all the leases on the airport have a 2-year CPI clause adjustment. So every 2 years, so it's on January 1st of odd years for some leases and even years for other leases, so we aren't doing them all at once. But every 2 years, we look at the change in the CPI index over that 2-year period, and we apply that percentage increase to the rent. And I can send you, because it's probably going to be helpful to you in the long term, the actual paragraph of the information of how we've set it forth in the lease. Because I recognized when we first drafted those that the easiest way to do this is actually put an example of the calculation in the language of the lease. So when you see the language actually says it gets changed on 2-year intervals from this date, and of course for these it will be 2-year intervals from January 1st, 2017. And then it says you go to the CPI tables and you look up the CPI index for December from 2 years ago. You compare it to the December that just went past, and you look at the difference, divide it by the first CPI number, and that gives you your percentage increase. And, you know, typically, you know, it fluctuates a little bit depending on how much inflation is going on in the country, but it's actually been pretty stable, and it's usually around 3 to 3.5% for a 2-year increase. So it's about 1.75 or so per year. And now, just one side note on that is, there's been criticism by some people saying, well, wait a second, CPI is not necessarily a great reflection of what's happening with property values, and what we're really trying to do is property values. And I've heard that argument before, but I've yet to see somebody come up with a really good and simple way for us to do the property values without having to do appraisals all the time, which are expensive. So it has actually worked pretty well. And I think if you look at over the long term, it actually has been pretty close to the increase in property values. here in Carson City. And point in fact, when you see that the CPI clause brought these guys within a penny of what the appraiser said it's worth today, geez, it looks like it worked pretty well. That's kind of my take on it.
I was going to say is, yeah, from an economic standpoint, I'm familiar with CPI and how helpful it can be in certain things. It is kind of weird to see it towards property value, but I understand that for the appraisal side of it. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr.? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Takis, thank you for forwarding me that appraisal. I didn't see anything in the appraisal, and if this has been discussed before, because I realize it came out in May, I didn't see any comparisons with any other airports' ground lease prices. And I know that we're different in a lot of ways.
That's generally correct. There was an area, I think it was on pages 20 and 21, where the appraiser actually looked at the returns on rental property, and he used the returns on rental property at the Reno airport and one other airport to develop what the rate of return on a lease should be. But he did not compare, as you've correctly observed, what are lease rates here versus the lease rates at Stead or Minden or one of the surrounding airports. And I was going to try and get a hold of him today to ask him, why is that? You know, what's the explanation for that? And unfortunately, I was in hearings all day. I really didn't get a chance to do it.
I saw where you mentioned there in the appraisal, and I see what he used for comparisons. I think there were 4 properties approximate to the airport, not counting the one at the airport in Reno, and he based his price on $1.75 a square foot for comparable land in the Air Industrial Park, and then a rate of return, I think it's 7%. And pointed out that rates of return in Reno were maybe 8% or 8 1/3, something like that. But that's land outside the airport, and even besides, there's a pretty huge swing in what those parcels all sold for. Some of them up in the $4 and $5 range, and some in $2.
Yeah, I'll tell you the appraisal of lease rate appraisal is a difficult science. You know, I think some would say it's not really a science. There's some kind of magic going on there, but it's a difficult science. But candidly, Bill Kimmel has a great reputation. He's done airport leases before. We utilized him years ago for land acquisition around the airport, and he's got really high credibility. So I'm tending to say, you know, he's the expert. We should rely on it.
Member Stotts?
The lease rates at Minden are 24 cents, and in Reno Stead, they're 36 cents. That's a huge difference. And those are airports. Those aren't commercial property that are lying next to the airport. I think there's something seriously wrong with this appraisal. Now, when he did this appraisal, he didn't take into effect the $30 million worth of infrastructure and improvements that we've made on the airport itself. And it just doesn't seem right for him to be making this appraisal, which is really low. I mean, you yourself said you expected 18 cents. I think it should be even more than that. I don't understand. I think it's a bad appraisal.
You know, you're right. When I first saw it, I was concerned about it because we had gotten other appraisals, although they were a few years back, that were in the 20-cent range. But there's a huge but there. The other parcels that we had appraised were not, you know, they were not interior triangle lease, aircraft storage only lease parcels. They were parcels where you could do whatever you wanted on them. You could do industrial, you could do manufacturing, you could do sales, you could put it in AM, PM, you can do all kinds of things. And there's a dramatic difference in value when you're looking at a very limited category of things you can do with the property versus a lot of things you can do with the property. And I think that drove a big part of that difference in values. You know, admittedly, like I said, I was kind of shocked by the rate initially, but, you know, our past chairman, Carl Hutter, did some analysis on the appraisal, and he called me after he did his analysis, said, Steve, you know, I went through all of his calculations. I think he's right. And so, there was a sanity check, to me at least, at that point, and Carl Hutter's done a lot of real property transactions, so he was pretty familiar with that stuff. But I would not call it a bad appraisal, and candidly, I'm not an appraiser. I don't play one on TV, and who am I to judge?
Member Stotts?
You've mentioned aircraft storage only a number of times. These properties are not aircraft storage only, and it seems to me at some point in time that we could get into trouble by giving this really cheap rate to properties that have a lot more stuff in them besides aircraft. It seems to me there's a potential violation of a law there.
Okay, no, the leases were granted for aircraft storage. The fact that people store other things in their hangars secondary to their aircraft storage, which was the discussion we had last month, is kind of irrelevant to the consideration. The primary use of these hangars are aircraft storage. What they are not allowed to do is they're not allowed to run other FBO services. They can't put up a sign and say aircraft repair or aircraft painting or interior or flight school or any of those things. Those are all things that don't fit within the statute. So I don't see a violation of the law. You're certainly entitled to your opinion as to, whether you find the appraisal credible or not. But I don't think. I guess I don't see the violation of law that you're suggesting.
Member Stotts?
Another issue, you just reminded me of something. There was a deal about, and I'm sure you were involved in this, where the FAA shut down our construction efforts. This was about 8 years ago, because somebody complained about the fact that the property sales, that we were paying way too much money for Serta's property. They thought that this could be some kind of collusion going on. So we got shut down for 6 months. Eventually that was resolved because there were 3 more appraisals that came in. I'm wondering if there's a chance that we might again run afoul of the FAA if they look at this 12 cents cost. Now, that's one issue. Let's address that one first.
Yeah. I'm not seeing an issue there. I mean, we're basing it on an MAI certified appraiser. There's nothing we're doing that violates any of our FAA assurances. The incident that happened previously is we used an MAI certified appraiser, not the same one, a different one, to purchase land from Mr. Serpa. We got an appraisal. We got FAA funding to acquire the land. We acquired the land. And then somebody complained saying, well, I think that appraisal was funky. The FAA didn't stop us from doing anything. The transaction was already completed. The FAA allowed us to continue to get FAA grants and everything else. What they asked us to do is let's get a review appraisal and see whether that number was correct, because there were people at the time who thought the same thing. They thought it was too cheap. We got a review appraisal. Now, there are different categories of review appraisals. You can get a review appraisal that says, I reviewed the appraisal, his methodology is correct that he's used. You can get somebody who says, methodology is not correct. Or you can get a higher standard where the review appraiser looks at it. Not only does he agree that he or she agrees that the methodology is correct, but they also agree with the final number the appraiser came to. And that's what ended up happening with the review appraisal we got. We didn't ask for that. We said, we want you to do the review appraisal, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he did the review appraiser, and when we got his review report, he certified to the right number. So yes, we have a history of people thinking that the appraisal must be somehow wrong and that the prices are too low, and that we gave, I think at that point, the argument was the price was too high, that we paid too much to John Serpa, that we should have paid less. And in fact, when we did the review appraisal, it turned out we had paid the right amount of money. And that was the incident with the FAA, and that was probably 8, 10 years ago, something like that.
See, another thing. It's very nice that these gentlemen are offering us this money to help assuage the expenses of the new terminal. But it also seems to me that it resembles the actions of payday lenders who take advantage of outfit or people who have a bit of a cash problem, and in the process hope to get a really considerably lower rate. Now, going from that, are these gentlemen would be interested in also paying the same amount of money they offered us for the terminal if there were a higher rate? Is this contingent, this money contingent on the lease rate that they're asking for?
Well, this was negotiated as a package deal, and so if you're asking, can you change the terms, you would have to ask them. I mean, this was what I believed was a fair exchange. Now, you believe something else. It's your prerogative, and you're a voting member. I'm not, so you can treat it any way you want to, but this is what we thought was a fair exchange.
When you say "we thought," who is "we"?
It was me, and I actually bounced this information off the chairman. So it was me, the chairman, and Mr. Mays, Correo, and Mr. the Siebold family representative, which is Tri-Motors LLC.
And through the discussion, then that party would be led to believe that this would be brought to the board for approval, and it'd be up to the board to vote in favor of it one way or another.
That's exactly correct.
Okay. And the appraisal who did this, the dollar amount or pennies amount, however you want to state that, when was the last time he did a similar appraisal of another airport?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that we had looked into his background before we had utilized him the last time, and he had fairly extensive experience. He is also one of the appraisers that's listed on the city's approved list of appraisers for treating county property, city county property. I guess the short answer is I don't know, but I didn't feel a need to investigate that, candidly.
But does he have a history of doing airport appraisals?
He's widely used for a lot of different types of appraisals, and he's not limited to airport. I've yet to meet somebody who only does airport appraisals. I mean, I don't think that category really exists out
I
there.
should have rephrased it. Has he done or does he do airport appraisals?
Yes, as a matter of fact, he has done property for our airport some years ago. I think it was, I want to say it was like 15 years ago, where we engaged him to do work for us, the Carson City Airport Authority.
It was mentioned from a chairperson here that the price difference between Minden and what's the other airport you mentioned?
Yeah, Minden's 24 cents. Stead is 38 cents. Not Stead, I'm sorry, Reno. And since Stead is also under the control of Reno, I suspect it's probably a pretty good assumption that it would probably be around 28, 29 cents.
Is there a concern from any board member that the price difference on those airport versus the pricing of what we're getting assessed here, there's such a variance in that? I mean, I don't know that much about airport land property value, so I'm just a little concerned that you're mentioning it, and it is quite a difference. So is that something we should be concerned about, or do we take another look at it, or can we raise the rates or lower the rates?
Yeah, well, the thing, there's actually even, it gets even worse. That rate at Minden, 24 cents, does not include infrastructure. It includes just the bare land. We have infrastructure here. That alone should have raised up the value of it considerably. And then, of course, at Reno, they have the infrastructure there, too.
Madam Chair.
Member Harvey.
I have had some experience with this process. I did spend 8 years on the Reno Territorial Authority with STED and that, and you're going to have a major difference in the infrastructure of Reno Tahoe Airport. There's no doubt the costs are there, always come up higher, especially than STED. STED had a much lower rate. I did chat with a few people there about when I saw this, because I think, like many of you, I thought, wow, that seems low when I first saw it. After talking with them, and I did have the opportunity to talk with Carl Hutter, as you mentioned too, about his appraisal of it. And after understanding a little more about it, I guess I felt like I kind of understand how they came to this number. And the appraisal, as you said, also I found out, heard pretty good things about him as well, pretty straight. So I think the way you came about this, about trying to mitigate this in a way by making it something more than just the 11 cents, was pretty creative. And so I feel pretty okay. I feel okay with this appraisal. I don't feel it's that much off. I guess the question you have about the infrastructure we've been putting in, and was that part of the appraisal? That's a good question that I wouldn't know the answer to and would wonder about.
Well, let me just add a point to that. Each of these developers paid an infrastructure fee to the airport. So that infrastructure was not paid for by the airport. It was ultimately paid for by the tenants. So if you go back to those original leases, each of those leases had an infrastructure flat fee that was charged up front on each of the leases. And that amount was charged up front and collected up front. So, and part of our logic was we wanted to recapture at the time the infrastructure that Country had put in. We wanted to recapture that from the tenants as well, because we recognized at the time we're providing them with some infrastructure. I would also caution you on doing the comparisons to other airports. There are so many differences in the way airports approach their land leases and their terminology and what's included and what's not included. And ours is fairly straightforward and fairly simple. We lease bare land. The developer needs to bring in all of their own private capital to develop it. We have a requirement that they have to construct the hangars. Our logic was this works as a good model because we end up getting the real property taxes on those buildings. And that has worked pretty well for this airport over the last 30 years or so. And so when you compare it to other airports, you got to look at their model. It's kind of the same thing when we were talking about last month. We were talking about hangar inspections. That hangar policy appears to have been written for airports where the airports own the hangars, which many of the airports around here, they own hangars. We aren't that way. We don't own hangars on this airport. That's not our business model. Maybe it should have been, I don't know, but it isn't. And so be real careful when you're comparing the other airports to make sure you got apples to apples. That's just my caution on that.
Member Collins?
With a real estate background, I at first was a little remiss when I looked at the numbers, but it seems like with other members, when I looked down and dived down kind of into the reality of our airport versus Minden versus Stead, and kind of how the airport has developed along the years, it seems that the rates, although a little bit lower than what I would expect, seem to be reasonably in what I would call a ballpark area. So regardless of whether or not they're where I would think they would be, I'm no CCIM, but I do think that personally they're in a reasonable range. They're not grossly out of balance.
Member White?
So what I see here is something that I would not expect in a business deal, where one side gets all of the advantage. So you folks have paid for an appraisal to raise your rent, and you're gifting the airport money. Can somebody explain to me how this makes sense? Why is it a good deal?
I could let Mr. Correo talk, but I can just tell you from my standpoint, the trade-off is we're getting additional money, they're getting additional years. Just that simple. But Mr. Correo or Mr. Mays, yeah, they're looking at me saying that's all they were going to say, I guess.
You're strictly looking at whatever it takes to get extra years, additional years on your leases. Is that the crux of the situation?
Mr. Correo, if you would give your name, sign in, and spell your last name, please.
There's no paper to sign in. But the name is Lud Correo, C-O-R-R-A-O. The reason to even attempt to do this is we've got an enormous investment out there with what we've built. And when we started here 22 or 23 years ago, whatever it was, the airport was in really bad shape. And if it wasn't for Neil down there, it probably would have failed. So in any event, there was a tremendous amount of money put into this thing. And as the time has gone on, we've probably gone beyond the period of time we thought we'd be here. We're still going to be here for an additional period of time, and it becomes a depreciating asset. So you're better off to hold on to what the values are by putting your money back into it now to try and hold the value at some reasonable arena of where it belongs. And so without that, you're actually depreciating more than it should be depreciating. It's hard to sell one of these things when the person understands at the end of his lease, the airport that you're building, the $600,000 or $700,000 or $1 million building goes away.
Thank you, Mr. Correo. Anyone else like to comment on this? Mr. Takis, do you have any further comment?
I do not.
Do any of the members have any further discussion? And Mr. Stotts?
I know you're getting tired of hearing from me. Just one thing, I noticed here that when we, on April 20th, we had the meeting and we passed a motion to, I'll just read the whole thing. I move to authorize staff to engage an appraiser from the city-approved list, jointly selected with the named tenants. And that phrase right there got me kind of wondering if this appraiser was cherry-picked, because I just don't understand how we could end up with such a low appraisal. That's all.
Yeah, I can respond to that. I don't believe there was any cherry picking. The reason that we did it as a joint selection is that if somebody had a really bad experience with one of the people on the list, we wanted to give that party, whether it was us or whether it was them, the ability to say, no, okay, we'll take anybody, but not that guy. And that's how we ended up with Bill Kimmel, because we both looked at Bill Kimmel, and we had used him before with success, and I believe Mr. Correo had used him before with success, and came to rely on his appraisal, and that's how we ended up with him. There wasn't any cherry picking that I can see. And the other thing to keep in mind is these are off the city's approved list, and the city did a good deal of vetting when the city adopted that list.
Mr. White, do you still have your light on?
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
That one's easier.
If there are no further comments from the public and no further discussion, do I have a motion to go forward with?
Discussion back there.
Pardon?
Got his hand
Oh,
up.
sorry, Steve, come on up. Mr. Lewis.
I'm sorry, I did not hear public comment, a call for public comment, and again, I don't have anything to sign. Steve Lewis with Sterling Air. As a fellow FBO, I certainly support what Mr. Correo says. It's a great business decision. I understand why they're doing it. But as Mr. Stotts was alluding to a little bit earlier, I was the chair of the Airport Authority when, unfortunately, we did go through that challenge that Mr. Takis referred to, specific to the Serpa property. That challenge basically was made on September 11th, 2008, and it was made to the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General and also to Senator Harry Reid's office and others. And we did, in fact, when we were notified by the FAA on January 12, 2009, they did, in fact, Steve, the ADO office down there did hold us off on any future funding until we got this cleared up. That was from Ray Caveo, who sent that letter to us. we were required by the FAA to do what I call a forensic appraisal, or what Steve referred to as a review appraisal. And thankfully, that appraisal by Jim Wimberly, if you remember now, that he is the one who, in fact, substantiated the first lease or first appraisal by Mr. Hutchinson, who we engaged originally for Mr. Serpa. So bringing back some old information. I too, like Mr. Takis and many of you, I kind of thought that 12 cents was pretty low. All of the appraisals that the airport authority have engaged in the past, there's always been a note in the appraisal that said that it conforms to FAA Advisory Circular 150/5100-17, change 6. I have just a copy of the front of that. It's 147 pages. I didn't bring it all. So in Mr. Hutchinson's appraisal and Mr. Wimberly's appraisal, it did say that it conformed to that FAA advisory circular. But I will say that advisory circular is very specific to AIP-funded projects, okay? This is not an AIP-funded project here. But that advisory circular absolutely lays out some specific criteria to the appraiser that they must consider. And there are two things that they suggest in the advisory circular that were not done here. One, they did not use as comps other airports. And as Mr. Stotts indicated, and I think others, the last lease that was signed at the Douglas County Airport was for 25 cents. I believe now they're offering land at 24 cents. Mr. Takis makes a valid argument that you got to make sure you're comparing an apple to an apple. I'm not sure what 24 or 25 cents at Douglas County gets you, and we pretty much know what 12 cents will get you here based upon this last appraisal. Mr. Harvey's correct, 39 cents at the Reno International Airport. They have a lot more amenities. But the two things that they asked in the advisory circulars that you use and compare other airports, and the other thing, you also need to value the infrastructure on the airport. The land that was evaluated here was land pretty much in the industrial park, the airport industrial park. But you take a couple of acres next to, let's say, Harley-Davidson Credit, you're not going to be able to land an airplane there or taxi an airplane, but you can on the airport. We have hundreds of acres to support the airport, infrastructure and safety. So all I'm here to do is to caution the board, because what I don't want you to do is go through what I went through back in 2009 and what Mr. Takis went through. It was not pleasant. They did hold us up. The FAA did hold us up for funding until we could kind of clear our good name and confirm to the FAA that we, in fact, did a good appraisal by a reputable appraiser that met the requirements of the FAA advisory circular for an AIP-funded piece of property. Again, this is not an AIP-funded property. So I'm not specifically sure if the requirement for this appraiser is to actually use the requirements in Chapter 2 of this advisory circular, and Chapter 2 is entitled Real Property Appraisals. And it's 9 pages long, and it goes through the criteria of what you do when you evaluate, to an appraiser, how you evaluate airport public property. And it's specific to public property. And I'm just suggesting that the board, if you accept this appraisal, feel good about this appraisal, because what you don't want is a backlash a year or two, or in the case that we dealt with many years ago, 3 years later, we get a filed complaint that basically stopped us for about 8 months. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Collins?
Yeah, can I, by any chance, borrow the front piece of that paper so I can write down the AC? I just want to get the number so I can...
It is Advisory Circular 150/5100-17, change 6, dated November 7, 2005. That is the most current one, and you would be specific to Chapter 2, which deals with appraisals. And again, I just want to caution you that, and I will leave this here for you, or I'll give it actually to Steve. It is specific to AIP-funded grants, so it is mandated that they use it. But the recommendations that they use and give to an appraiser recommend that they use surrounding airports, and you have to evaluate the infrastructure that you have on your airport.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Takis, do you have any further comment?
No, I would just note that I don't think that the appraisers we used to actually put this out to lease in the first place went to this level, because those weren't AIP projects either. But when we did do land acquisition, those are AIP. We're using the federal government's money. We did make sure that we followed all of the applicable ACs. So if we were buying the land from these guys and using federal money, yeah, by all means, this would apply. But I don't remember this. I don't remember reading this before. I've read a lot of ACs, and I just don't remember this one.
Are there any further comments from the members? Any further comments from the public? Do I have a motion to accept the extensions or to reject the extensions? Do I have any motion on this item? Mr. Harvey?
Mr. Takis, so, and knowing Mr. Lewis, and I appreciate your service to this board before and that experience, if that is the normal practice, I guess it gives me pause to ask, should we go back and ask, do we look at those comps? Do we make sure that those were evaluated? Was the infrastructure evaluated? Would it make sense for us to push this back, to come back to us after that's been reviewed? Because I can tell you, I've certainly got some pause to consider this as it is right now.
Yeah, let me just be clear. That is not the standard practice that we have used in the past to lease out property. What that is that is the process that's required when you're using federal funds to acquire property. Now, you may think, or you may be your opinion that you should use the same process for everything. I don't know, but that wasn't, we didn't specify that as a requirement to this appraiser. This appraisal is nearing its 6-month lifetime, and you know, I mean, it's going to cost additional money to extend it. You know, it expires by its under the Nevada statute for use on January 5th. So we're pretty close to the end of that appraisal process. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you, and I have not discussed, you know, I don't remember this AC, candidly. In fact, I was appreciative of Mr. Lewis because I had forgotten the names of the 2 appraisers that were involved last time. But last time was an acquisition of land using federal funds. That's not what we're doing. Now, if there's something in that AC that you think would be meaningful to renewal of a lease, yeah, then by all means, it should be incorporated. But the Nevada statute certainly doesn't require that, and that's what we're operating under, the Nevada statutes. I guess I'm saying my inclination, my recommendation is still you go forward with it at this point. If you're not comfortable doing that, then you guys are the guys who vote. You say that and you do that.
What I'm hearing from you is you don't feel like we'll have the same issues as the FAA coming back to us and stopping us from getting our grants.
I definitely don't think that's going to be a problem. We are not using federal funds to acquire property. Somebody complains to the FAA that they think we lease property too low. That's not an issue for the FAA.
That being said, do I have a motion?
Well, I'll go ahead and get the party started. I will make the motion to approve the request extension of the leases as presented.
Do I have a second?
I offer a friendly amendment.
Member White?
I'll second that, Dan, and offer a friendly amendment that the donation of $84,648.45 be spent only with the contractor working on the terminal, that being Professional Home Developers Incorporated, and that $84,648 sum be represented in the financial reports separately in some nature, so we can clearly identify where that money was spent.
Motion accepted. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Showing Member Stotts and Member Shirk as opposed. Motion carries.
Can we take a break?
I'd like to take a break. We'll resume at 7:35. think we're about ready to resume, please. We'll call this meeting back to order at 7:35. And we will proceed to item F3. For possible action, approval of request by Pete Norman to construct a lounge and storage within hangar H3. Mr. Norman, are you here? Please come forward, sign in, spell your last name, and say your name for the record.
My name's Peter Norman, Norman. I'm seeking approval to do some improvements in my hangar in an existing loft area that was already built with the hangar from the day it was approved. We have an upstairs loft area and all the Carson Air Group 50 by 50 hangars. A good portion of them have existing pilot lounges built out in the upstairs area. Mine is just wide open to the downstairs, and it's expensive to heat the area. If we want to use a hangar, we have to heat the entire hangar. If we want to do a briefing room and a lounge area and a little kitchenette and a bathroom. So what I'm proposing is less than 600 square feet. I'm using the plans that have already been approved by several other hangars, so it'll be the exact same build out as several other hangars. We're going to be pulling permits on it, and we're also going to be using a licensed contractor. So part of the permit process is that we get approval from the airport authority, and I seek that. Any questions?
Do we have any questions of the members for Mr. Norman? Thank you, Mr. Norman.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment on this item? Do we have any discussion amongst the members? Member White?
No,
Oh,
I don't.
sorry, thought your light was on.
No.
Discussion on the item, further discussion on the item, or do I have a motion?
I move we approve the request by Peter Norman to construct a pilot lounge and storage room as presented.
I second the motion.
That would be seconded by Member Stotts. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item F4, for possible action, approval of proposal to lease 576 square feet of the west wing of the terminal building to Carson Aviation Adventures for its flight school. And this would be presented by Member Collins, who has left us.
So just so I can fill in the open meeting law ethics thing, this item involves Member Collins from the Airport Authority. Therefore, he is notifying us that he's disclosing he has an interest and he's abstaining from a vote. And so I'm assuming that he will present the item if the item's to be presented, or are you presenting it or no?
I don't really know if there's much to present.
Okay.
I mean, if anybody has any questions about it, I'm happy to answer what information I have regarding it.
Member Collins, Mr. Collins, would you approach the podium, state your name, spell your last name for the record, and explain to us any questions you may have about the draft rental agreement that you, I believe, received a copy of from Mr. Rowe.
My name is Aaron Collins. Last name is spelled Collins, as put on that name tag over there. There is one thing that's worth mentioning. Has everybody seen the lease? No? Okay. Okay, cool. Some people have. I don't have any particular questions to the way that it's written. It is currently under negotiation. It's worth mentioning that because there are some things that aren't necessarily phrased properly. But outside of that, I personally don't have any questions with the process, with the terms. Yeah.
I guess I'm just confused. Are you asking the authority to go forward and approve the lease today, or no?
No.
Okay, great. Okay, that's the important thing to
The way the lease is written is not in such a way that Carson Aviation Adventures is comfortable with signing.
Are your concerns regarding the rate or individual technical terms within the lease itself?
It's individual technical terms. The rate is not, as far as my knowledge, is not so much of an issue. It's some of the other parts of the terms that seem to get somewhat, there just needs to be more clarification.
You feel they're a little convoluted?
Yeah, and my question also is the necessity of some of the terms in there as well, if those are necessary based off of the type of lease that we're writing, or if those are just things that we wish we had. I can't, without the lease in front of me, I can't mention those, but it's, like I said, it's a conversation that needs to be had and is in process, as I do not have the authority to sign the lease myself regardless.
Yeah, and I should say I'm happy to sit down with either Mr. Collins and Mr. Vowell or whoever it needs to be to go through it, because I drafted the lease somewhat based on our standard hangar lease arrangement an FBO arrangement, and it's not a good fit. I mean, it's just, I took a shot at it, and I thought it would work, but certainly I'll be the first to admit if it can be improved. I'm happy to sit down and work with him.
At this time, would you be amenable to us just pushing it forward to the next agenda?
Yeah, if we need, in order to move forward with this, if we need to have all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, then I would like for it to be pushed forward so that we have time to finish the negotiation process.
That item will be removed from the agenda for tonight for further discussion and placed on the next agenda. Thank you.
Can I come up now?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Collins is returning to the dais. The next item on the agenda for possible action, items related to the Carson City Airport project to rehabilitate the North Apron, including monthly status report, potential changes to the work or work schedule, construction change orders, and other related items. Mr. Clegg.
Thank you. The North Apron's substantially complete. We had a final inspection earlier this month. Granite is currently doing punch list items, and the other remaining items include apron lighting, and which the poles will be showing up. I believe they're scheduled to show up the 21st of November, and they'll get erected. The other item that is outstanding is that we intend to put down a coal tar emulsion, which is a fuel-resistant material, and put that on the jet pads and also in the tie-down areas, so that if there is any fuel spills, which we've had a few already, that at least the pavement might hold up better. So my understanding is that the punch list items should be completed by next week, and the reason why the project's substantially complete is because the airport's able to use the improvements. So what that essentially means is that we just stop the contract period so that they don't run into liquidated damages because we're delaying them for whatever reason. But then when they do go out and do real work, like putting up the apron lighting, that's a 3-day process. That'll count towards the contract period. And I explained that in my engineer's report, where as of November 5th, Granite had used 88 days out of the 105 contract period. So included with this engineer's report that I handed out and I emailed to everybody, but I don't believe some of the new members got it. I include a financial summary as of last Friday. We also show an exhibit where the fuel-resistant seal coat's going to be applied, provide some pictures of the construction, but we've also attached change order number 2 in here. And that is the action item under this. And the change order accounts for just minor changes in quantities throughout the course of the project, but it also includes future work that we know that is going to happen, such as this fuel-resistant seal coat. Unfortunately, we can't put it down until next spring because of temperature requirements. It requires 50 degrees for a 24-hour period, and we're not going to get that for a while. So with that, are there any questions?
Member White?
First of all, just let me comment on the report itself. Perfect. That's the way a report, construction report should be done. Awesome. In regards to this coal tar coating, since we're not going to do that for an extended period of time, where are we at with making the final payment to Granite? And should we reserve that, the cost of that, until that part of the project is done? I mean, if they go out of business next week, then we got to monkey around trying to get the money back and get it done by somebody else. So should we withhold the cost of that?
Well, unfortunately, the way AIP projects work is that until you finish the project outright, the FAA withholds 10% of their grant to the airport. So Granite has agreed that we can withhold 10% of their contract. So we definitely have plenty of money to cover it. Yeah, in fact, if you look at the financial summary, their contract amount, assuming that change order number 2 gets approved, their contract amount's $2.2 million, and so we're going to withhold $220,000. In fact, I meant to mention that change order number 2 is actually a deductive change order. It actually reduces the contract amount by $64,455, which is extraordinary. I mean, I love to come in and say we're under budget and we're way ahead of schedule, and this has been just a great project in that respect. So, in fact, where we're at money-wise, we've only spent 82% of the total project budget.
I might add that I was, along with Brian and Jim, I was at most of those meetings, and I have, having been an administrative manager for a construction company years ago, this was an extremely well-run project and very timely and very thorough. So I have only good things to say about them. Any other comments from the members? Any public comment?
So I do request that, that you make a motion on approving change order number 2. It's not the final change order. There might be some minor changes before the project's finished, but this really captures the bulk of the work. And the final change order, which would probably be presented sometime next spring, would be a minor increase in cost.
Do I have a motion to accept change order 2?
I'll make it.
Member White.
I move to approve change order number 2 with Granite Construction Company for the North Apron Reconstruction Project.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Member Collins. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None heard. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that closes that item. Do you have anything further on the engineer's report, Jim?
Yes, I do. On the airport master plan, several months ago, task number 6 with Atkins to perform the master plan was approved for $440,000. As part of the FAA requirements, we had to get an independent fee estimate from another airport planning group to compare to our fee to just justify that it's fair and reasonable. Anyway, that independent fee estimate did come back at $424,224, which is within a 10% tolerance that the FAA uses as a rule of thumb to determine whether the original proposal that we came up with, that's Atkins, was fair and reasonable. And in fact, it is because of the IFE that was submitted. So the next step is to send the independent fee estimate to the FAA to get their concurrence that you will be, when the grant actually comes in from the FAA, that you'll be able to sign the contract with Atkins to move forward with the master plan. And then the third item on the report is the Airport Capital Improvement Program. The meetings with the FAA to discuss that, the ASIP, was originally scheduled for the first week in November, and it's been rescheduled for November 29th. So after that meeting, we'll make any changes that are necessary to the ASIP and bring it forward to the airport authority for final approval. Hopefully, we'll have a December meeting, and that should work out just fine. And so then the only other thing I've got is that I am going to start working part-time for Atkins. So Brian Fitzgerald, who has been working with me, how long now?
A decade.
He makes it sound really...
It's long and drawn out. 10 years, Jim.
Well, in any case, Linda can attest to how Brian ran the construction meetings for the North Apron project. He's educated, understands construction. He understands this process because he's been working with me for actually more than 10 years. So we've been doing this for a long time together. Anyway, thanks for your time while I've been here.
We thank you too, Jim, and welcome, Brian. We look forward to seeing you monthly instead of weekly. All right, if that concludes the engineer's report, we will move on to the airport manager's report. Tim?
Just a quick update on the terminal. We are ready to move in. We're waiting on a determination on phone system. Once that is determined, hopefully by the end of this week, we will be in by the end of the month, after Thanksgiving. So that's what the plan is. Regarding a briefing item that I had sent out with my briefing regarding a complaint by Paul Hamilton of Sport Aviation regarding some wake turbulent issues by helicopters on the field. We had a safety meeting with the FAA on November 10th, and it's actually appropriately, the appropriate subject was wake turbulence. After the meeting, we all got together with Bristow Helicopters, some of their pilots, Carson Aviation Adventures, myself, and the FAA. And we sat down and worked out a plan to have Bristow and Paul Hamilton and others entities get together, work out their issues. Simply because the airport has done everything they could to have everyone operate as safely as possible, and we want them to work together, stagger their landings and takeoffs, and do that sort of thing. So Aaron could probably chime in on this, but I think we're going to work out an equitable solution so that everybody's happy. But not everybody is going to be happy, but it's we still have to deal with Apollo Drive. So, but that's basically part of my main briefing. Just a couple of real quick announcements. The Planning Commission is holding a meeting on November 30th at the Planning Commission regarding the proposed RV park. I've sent them our concerns that the Airport Authority has expressed in the past regarding the taking off and landing of airplanes over that area west of the airfield, the possibility of noise complaints, of the authority's concerns regarding the longevity of certain RVs coming in for anything more than 30 days. Also, the possibility that the Airport Authority may want to look at a navigation easement. And I will attend that meeting and bring a report to the authority at the next regular meeting, or if necessary, I'll put it in an email to all of the members and see where it goes. We just want to make sure that if they do put in the RV park, which they probably will, we just don't want to be inundated with noise complaints, because we are an airport, and even though you can't see the airport from the area of the RV park, that we want people to know that we're here. So, Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you might add on your, to the items that the Airport Authority discussed at that meeting, you might add that we invited them to present their proposal to the Airport Authority. We scheduled a meeting, and then I think it was like the day before the meeting, they called us and said, well, we're not going to show up because we're not even sure this project's going to go forward. And so, in essence, they've avoided us. And if they truly were concerned about working with us, they could have at least shown up or at least approached us when they thought the project was going again. The request that's in front of the Planning Commission is a request for a special use permit to change the use, which is currently limited to 30 days, RVs staying no more than 30 days, to 180 days. And that's one of the kind of touch points, because when Tim and I went to the, I can't remember, what do you call those meetings, Jim, where everybody gets together at the early stage of a project, something like pre-project review or something, and they invite all the city departments there. You have this meeting. Well, we were at that meeting, and we said, look, if people are only there for 30 days and they're annoyed by the noise because they're on the other side of the hill, on the takeoff, place where we're generating power, generating the most noise, they're on the other side of the hill. They may not know we're over here. If they're annoyed by that noise and they're only there for 30 days or less, fine, they can always move. But they're changing it to 108. They want to propose a change to 180 days. Well, then you're talking about people who might be in there on leases, and they may not be able to move. Their remedy might be to complain. And we want to avoid that problem. We want to be good neighbors to everyone, but we also want to make sure that people who become neighbors of ours know that we're on the other side of the hill, and that these airplanes may be taking off fairly early in the morning right over their RVs. So I think that you should mention the thing about, we attempted to work with them, but they haven't reciprocated. They didn't appear in front of us. They haven't approached us since this project apparently got back on the track. The only communication we had, I don't think it's worth bringing up, is we got what I would call kind of a hate letter from the property owner, a young lady who apparently saw it as a way to vent, who accused us of violating every law in the book by informing the planning department what our concerns were. And so hopefully she's calmed down by now. But I think that you would do that. It would be well to do that. And I would love to be there to help you, but unfortunately, as I told Tim, I've got a 2-day hearing that starts on the 30th and goes through the 1st. It's complex. I have experts flying in from out of state, and I expect that I'll be working all night, all day in the hearing room and all night with the experts, so I probably won't be able to make it.
Yeah, that and, I keep having these nightmares about an airplane taking off and having an engine fail, and, where's he going to go? It's going to hit an RV. So even that's not worth bringing up at the meeting, but it's just something that we certainly don't want to happen, and we want to work with these guys, but we need to know that they understand that we're an airport and we're not going anywhere.
Tim, could you also discuss, did I not hear that their clubhouse, quote, clubhouse, was changed to a 2-story building instead of a single-story?
I did, and I didn't mention that, but I did tell them in my report of the concern that if the clubhouse is going to be 2-story, that we would request a Part 77 study to ensure that there's no adverse effect on navigation or airspace penetration. Because right now that proximity of the clubhouse is basically directly under our noise abatement, our voluntary noise abatement course.
Make a good target, so
Member Collins?
Forgive my naivete, but we're talking about the west side of the airport. Is this correct?
That's correct. If you go a little west of Gonai, there's a hill there.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of the hill, there are 2 flattened tables out there that have been excavated. Those are the areas of the RV park.
Okay, so the RV park has not yet been built, right?
That's correct. It is in the planning stage and going before the Planning Commission for discussion.
Okay, one other thing mentioning the previous item regarding wake turbulence. I think we had talked and kind of agreed that it might be a good idea for 2 days out of the month to do a NOTAM. Do you remember the specifications regarding that?
Yeah, that is basically a NOTAM when the Bristow Helicopters conducts its operations that we will probably put on the AWAS, the NOTAM, just letting people know to be cautious that helicopters are operating just north of the runway.
Member White?
I do have one more thing. I'm sorry. I received this late in the day. I just didn't have time to get the information that directly relates. But several months ago, we had a meeting with the Department of Taxation, who is attempting to pass a rule regarding depreciation schedule of aircraft. They're wanting to go from a 5% residual to a 20%, and I know that that's going to be quite a cost to aircraft owners, especially those buying new aircraft. The meeting is posted for December 5th and will be held at the Silver State Insurance Exchange at 2310 South Carson Street, Suite 2, at 9 a.m. on December 5th. So I will be attending that, and there are a few others that have expressed interest, Steve Lewis being one, because it will directly affect his business as an aircraft salesperson.
Member
Are there
Stotts?
any questions?
Member Stotts?
No, I just want to make note of this business about the, going back to the RV park. If they're able to go to 180 days, that means we basically have permanent residents there, because they could just take their trailer out of the park for a week and come back and do another 180 days. So that's something that we probably ought to consider.
As a person with experience in RVs, when I first moved to Nevada, I had a triple-wide, 35-foot triple-wide travel trailer. That was my primary residence, and it was taxed accordingly. So, yeah, I lived in the same RV park for about 3 years when I lived here, and it was month to month. So when people sign a lease for 180 days, it's a little different matter. So I don't know how they're going to work this, but using it as a primary residence, the trailer itself is one thing, but using the lot that you're on as a primary residence, that may be something else. So I don't know what the legalities of that would be.
Any further comments on this item? Mr. Collins?
There was just one last thing I wanted to say, and being a part of the flight school, already as it is, operating out of Carson is scary, and the ideas of an engine failure. Losing what I consider to be valuable real estate in case of an engine failure does definitely concern me, so I think I personally will probably end up trying to be there as well, so I appreciate you making this announcement.
Any further comment? Any reports from members? Oh, sorry. Legal counsel report, sorry.
Yeah, I had two quick things. One is back to the RV park. One thing to keep in mind is, if somebody owns property, we can't tell them they can't develop it, and so if, all we can do is point out the things that we think are incompatible with the surrounding areas. So just be careful when you're commenting it, because sometimes people perceive us as trying to block any development so that we'll have a clear space to land an airplane, and that's a position that I don't think we can defensively take. Now, we have had people who've looked at that property before. We've said, it'd be really great if you could line rows between like the mini storages, when somebody talked about mini storage, so they run east and west, so that if you did have to put an airplane down, you might have a better chance of surviving because you'd have something to put it down on. But when you look at the diagram for this one, it pretty much runs north and south. It doesn't really lend itself to that. One other thing on the positive side, though, is originally in the plan, they showed ponds there with a fountain or something. And courtesy of Kurt Haukuhl from the Nevada Department of Transportation Aviation, he provided us with a bird migration study that shows that right now all those seagulls that live up at the dump, they migrate down to an area that's east of the Carson City Airport. You put ponds in there, and there's a good chance they're going to migrate right across the Carson City Airport, which would be a very bad thing for aviation. The reason I say there's a good piece of news here is in this latest plan, they've taken those out and they've put putting greens in. And so I think they've at least responded to that concern. But yeah, by all means, it's really helpful if you can go and give them meaningful input, because the Planning Commission's just like you guys. You like to get as much information as you can to make the best decision. The other thing I wanted to mention is the tax, just reading the notice is unclear to me what they're proposing this time around at the Department of Tax with regard to airplanes. Yeah. The description sounds like they're trying to figure out where you assess the personal property taxes on an airplane. So for example, if an airplane is in a couple of different places, how do you figure out which place to tax it as personal property, or how do you apportion it? That's what it sounds like from the notice. But the last hearing they had, what they were proposing is to change the way you actually value the airplane. And currently, airplanes can be depreciated down to 5% of their value. Someone in the Department of Taxation apparently looked at Trade-A-Plane and some other resources to find out what are airplanes selling for. And they said, yeah, some of these old airplanes are selling for a lot of money. So, yeah, it's some. Yeah, there's a whole lot of them out there that are not. But I think they concluded that 5% of the value is too low. And so their proposal at that last meeting was to change it to, you can only depreciate it to 20% of its value. So if you own an older airplane like mine, and that rule goes into effect, I'm going to see a fourfold increase to my personal property tax because I'm already at the 5%, and they're going to bounce it back up to 20. You know, for me, it's probably not that much money. For a lot of people, it could impact them very, very, very difficultly. And so, so it is important that we track it. I'm glad to hear Tim's going to go to it. If I'm able to, I'll go listen in too, and we'll try and defense it. I know there's a lot of people, a lot of pilots who are concerned about this. I don't know how many actually show up at the tax hearing. The woman who's running the hearing is a very nice woman. I think she's trying to do the best she can, but this is like the third one that I've seen from her where it sounds like kind of shooting in the dark a little bit, and I think it would be helpful to give her some meaningful input. That's all I have.
She obviously doesn't own an airplane.
No, she's clearly not a pilot, but...
Just one added point. I did testify during that hearing, and from an airport standpoint, I thought, well, this is a really good idea because we'll see an increase in revenue, but it will only be temporary. You have to look over the long term because it will hurt aviation, and at some point it will begin to hurt our revenue source. So I made that statement very clear, and fortunately they tabled it to talk about it at another time, and that time is the 5th.
Are there any other comments on this item? Any more questions of Mr. Takis? There being none, do we have any reports of members? Hearing none, I call this meeting adjourned at 8:12.